100 million, debt charge is 694 million, and the other chunk is 2.2 billion. Where's the money coming from? Provincial sales tax, 2.3 billion. That's partly due to the raise in 2017 and the expansion of the PST. Personal income tax, 2.6 billion. Federal transfers, 2.5 billion. Corporate income tax, 729 million. And other taxes, 427 million. We see potash there at 618 million. We'll have more on that later, as the government did make a change to potash and the tax structure. What's new? Well, a $3,000 tax credit for volunteer firefighters and emergency responders. This is a campaign promise made by the Saskatchewan Party last election. They didn't fulfill what the Minister of Finance says. In the wake of the Humboldt crash, it's something that they felt was important. They have the money to do it. So there's about 7,700 people that will be eligible for that tax credit. We have $13 million for intersection safety. That's also response to some of the crashes across the province. And they're going to eliminate, as I mentioned, the Sask Resource Credit for potash. That's going to bring in about $117 million in new revenue for the government. And the government's touting this as one of their highlights of the budget this year, $30 million for mental health and addictions services. That mental health funding breaks down like this: $402 million in total, 75 new residential support beds, 3 rapid access to addiction medicine clinics. They're going to be in Regina, Saskatoon, and Prince Albert, 24/7 nursing supports for LaRange at the Detox Center, and 12 new children and youth staff. $3.3 million for schools. Now in Regina, one of the highlights there on the capital side is combining St. Pius, Cole St. Pius and Argyle schools into a joint use facility in Saskatoon, replacing St. Francis, and consolidating and replacing 4 schools in Moose Jaw as part of a joint use school. For highways, another one we want to look at, $121 million for highways, bridges, and culverts, $60 million for twin and passing lanes on 9 highways overall, and $13 million on highway intersection safety. So that's how some of the numbers break down. We'll show you those numbers again later. Right now I want to bring in my co-host today on the Budget Live show. It's Geoff Leo, our investigative reporter here at CBC Saskatchewan. Jeff's been milling around today and finding out what some of the stakeholders think of this budget, what their initial impressions are. What have you been hearing?
Yeah, so this is sort of like journalistic speed dating here, Adam. As you know, there are a lot of people, you can see them around here, stakeholders we like to call them, so various advocacy groups, that sort of thing. And so yeah, been chatting with them. The thing I think that stands out most that people have been saying is it's a lot better than 2017, which you might remember, that's the budget. We're still talking about the consequences of the 2017 budget. So I guess politically, it's kind of clever early in your mandate to do the really bad news stuff. This one is, I think, less of a bad news budget. There are still going to be people here who won't be super happy. I think of people, especially in the education sector, that saw a 0.6 increase overall in their budget, which is, you know,
they would consider that a cut.
They would consider that a cut. Some interesting stuff we're really not going to have much detail about in social services. That's also kind of caught my eye. Some new spending in the social services sector with children and families. Apparently more details to come in the future, but we definitely see the government reinvesting in that area as well. And so we'll be chatting with folks throughout the day.
So Geoff and I will be doing those interviews. Thanks, Geoff. Yep. Right now I'm going to bring in Jim Farney, our political analyst for today's budget. And Jim is the department head at the University of Regina's School of Political Science and International Studies. And Jim, what are your initial impressions of the budget?
I mean, overall, they've done what they promised 3 years ago to do, which is kind of, they balanced it, more or less, a bit of a surplus. After that, it starts to get kind of hard to talk about because it's this plethora of little small things, little investments here, little changes there. I don't think anybody in any one of the big sectors, social services, health, or education, is going to walk away completely happy today. But it's also hard for them to say, oh look, we had an absolute cut that's easy to mobilize against the government on.
You and I were in the lockup earlier, and that's something that happens here in Saskatchewan where we get an advanced notice of what's happening in the budget. We get to ask questions of the finance minister, and then we hear from the NDP. What were some of your takeaways from hearing from the finance minister today?
She emphasized the balance thing. I mean, it's been their branding, this whole exercise. She did try to say, we really heard the need for more mental health. So that's something the government's trying to put out there as that investment. The other thing that you kind of heard in the lockup was that the projections for the economy overall are pretty healthy. And I think that's kind of a background story we don't think about. This is not a government that's shaping its budget or its services based on trying to rescue an economy they think is in trouble. And the one big tax change, they explicitly kind of referenced, hey, the price of potash investment's fine, we're going to cut a bunch of deductions that'll mean $120-ish million in more revenue for the government because that industry is doing okay.
And on the NDP side, they were criticizing the debt rising. They said it's been a triple of the debt. Over the past 10 years, it's going up again, 1.8 billion. The government's saying, we have to invest, we still have to maintain government services, build things. What did you take of the NDP's messaging?
I think the NDP is in a hard spot. It has to make a decision. Does it worry about debt? They were also referencing, well, we don't like the PST being higher, that's $800 a household a year, but we also want more services. It's really hard to have all three of those at the same time. Maybe you can have two of the three, but they need to make a decision as a party which two they want.
From a political strategy standpoint, we have the election next fall. Is this a pre-election budget? It's a good news budget as far as no deficit, and the government will say across many sectors its spending is going up.
Yeah, so what they're able to do is they now have they've leveled things off, they have a level playing field, they've erased in their own minds the bad memories of 2015, and they can now come out and say, well, the Moe government's vision for the future is whatever it's going to be. There's not a lot of hints about where they're moving, I would say, in this budget.
Thanks, Jim. We'll have Jim providing some more analysis a little bit later. We're going to have some more people weighing in on this budget today, the 2019-20 budget of $34.4 million surplus. We'll go now to Geoff Leo, who has a guest. Jeff.
Yeah, thanks very much, Adam. I'm here with Todd McKay with the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. The Prairie Director, who's joining us, had a chance to, I guess you had a chance to hear about the budget earlier. What stands out to you?
Well, number one, we've got the operational deficit taken care of. The government's paying its bills from on a day-to-day basis. That's a really good thing, and that's a really important step. On the other hand, remain concerned. The debt continues to rise. That's concerning. We need to get that moving the other way. Back when Premier Moe, before he was Premier Moe and was running for the job, we asked him to sign a pledge, a taxpayer protection pledge, to get the operational budget balance in 2019, and a few years from now get the debt going back down. Step one's complete. Good job, but now we got more work to do.
Okay, so debt going up. Now, and this is from memory, so that's always risky, but I'm thinking it's like $1.8 billion up this year, and so and a lot of that is the government says, well, look, this is capital spending. We are investing in Saskatchewan, so that's good spending. Is this good spending?
Listen, that's really not how it works. When you rack up debt, one thing happens, you have to pay it back. And actually, there's one other thing that happens, you end up having to pay interest on that debt. The interest on the debt this year is going to be almost $700 million. It doesn't matter what you borrow that money for, you got to pay the interest. We've got to get that debt coming back down. It's good to make sure you're keeping up with your bills sort of on a day-to-day basis, but we do need to get the debt going back down, and that's a big problem.
Yeah, okay, and just one final thing. I mean, I think one other thing the government would say, and it's worth noting, our debt to GDP ratio. So the amount of debt we have compared to how much we take in on an annual basis is pretty good by comparison. I think we're number 3 in the country, and a lot of other provinces are way above us. So I mean, I think they say that to say, look, we can afford some extra debt, and we need to do this sort of investment. So what do you think about the debt to GDP issue?
Of course, Saskatchewan is in a much better position than most other provinces. That said, that's dangerous logic. That's a little bit like saying you're the soberest one in the bar. That's not necessarily the best measure to use. A lot of other provinces are in huge problems. To say we're better off than them isn't much. It is good that we're better off than them, but we need to do a lot better. We got to get the debt going back down rather than continuing to rise.
All right, the soberest one in the bar. That does not mean you should get behind the wheel.
That's correct. That's correct. There's still some danger there.
All right. Okay. Well, thanks very much. That's Todd McKay, Canadian Taxpayers Federation. We're going to go back to Adam Hunter now for a bit more.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm here with Gordon Barnard from SUMA, and Gordon, I know it's fairly new, you have some time to digest this, but what are your initial impressions of the budget?
Well, we have mixed feelings, certainly some positive and some negative. The positive is the $10 million additional on the revenue sharing, which is money coming from the province to the municipalities. Of that 10 million, 1.5 is going to be dedicated towards governance and joint projects, cooperation amongst the municipalities. And so that's all good news from that point of view. There's some funding for northern highways and increased money for transit. So I think those are some of the good things. The two parts that we're unhappy with, or disappointed I guess would be a better word, is the PST on construction projects for municipalities. That's a huge hit for us, because the municipality is collecting money from the province and the federal government for an infrastructure project. Perhaps they've had to do fundraising in the community, and then all of a sudden now they have to find an extra 6%, which is huge. We had hoped that would be gone this year. It's not, so we'll continue to keep pressing. And the other one is cost sharing on cannabis and the excise tax on that. The federal government is going to keep 25%. 75 was to go to the province, with them sharing 25 of that to us. And they said, well, there's not enough money there yet to share. The issue is not the amount of money, but the percentage. And so if it's 25% of $1 or $10 million, it's still 25%. So we'll continue to press on those 2 points, but other than that, we're quite content with the budget.
And on the excise tax, just quickly, this is the first year that government's ever had cannabis on the budget books. They're saying that could be about $3 million in an excise tax, so that is a fair bit, a chunk of change that the municipalities could use.
Well, even if the province would just say, okay, we agree on 25%, regardless of what the amount is, that would be our hope, and certainly that's what we're pushing for.
Gordon, thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
That's Gordon Barnhart with SUMA. You heard his thoughts on the initial thing. I mentioned there the pot revenue piece. That it's the first time that pot revenue has been on the budget books. The government is anticipating about $5 million in total tax revenue from pot, with about $3 million in that federal excise tax, just over $1 million here in Saskatchewan, and of course not all of the 61 pot stores open to this point. I have Geoff Leo here standing by, my co-host tonight. Geoff is standing by with a guest. Geoff.
Yeah, thanks very much. It's here with Scott Livingstone, who is with the Saskatchewan Health Authority, the newly created Saskatchewan Health Authority, the CEO. And this is a huge organization. Is it $3.6 billion or something like that? Right. Yeah. And so from what you've seen in the budget, what's your initial reaction from what the government's done?
So our initial reaction is good, happy. We're very appreciative for the funding, especially the new $30 million for mental health and addiction. As everyone knows, these are significant pressures across our system in the province. Yeah. This money and the number of initiatives will go a long way for us to help address some of the concerns both in the community and with our providers. Also, I think the ongoing support and capital funding to move forward with designs for both Prince Albert and Weyburn are great news for us. As our infrastructure is always in need of renewal and replacement, and we're happy to see that work continue on as well.
Okay, so let's start with mental health. So first of all, I mean, obviously there's a significant need there that people have felt is under addressed. Can you describe what the need is out there? How urgent is this situation?
Well, I would say across the entire piece, Geoff, it's very urgent, and it's not just a matter of money, it's a matter of getting professionals in the province to address some of those urgent needs. So as an example, with youth and youth mental health, and we've been doing a lot of work to try to streamline the process for referral and care, particularly around Saskatoon, where we saw some longer waiting lists relative to Regina. But in that case, we have funding. Our challenge is getting boots on the ground and those recruited psychiatrists and other health professionals in the province to actually support that work. So that one isn't on anybody but our organization with respect to how we go out and recruit.
Right, so in other words, now you've got the money, so there's no excuse for you, but this is tough though. Just having the money is really only half the battle, isn't it?
It is, and with mental health and addiction, it's not about one program, it's about a multitude of programs that are glued together that take people through the healing, and that goes both on mental illness and addictions. And in addictions, it's not one thing that we can do to actually improve that area. So it's not just having more inpatient beds for detox tax. We're having the new RAM program that was announced around rapid access to anti-addictive medicine. Yeah. So it's how we plug it all together. So one of the things we do have though is we do have a 10-year provincial mental health and addiction plan, which we inherited as an organization from the former sector. But the good news is that was done as a province, and that's been guiding our work, and that's where this investment is aligned. So if you look at that plan and these investments, it's around how we bolt it all together.
Really quickly here, the hospitals, I suspect it comes as pretty good news for Prince Albert and for Weyburn. But of course, this is early stages, so this is planning money. Right. How significant a step is this for these two hospitals?
It's like that $5 million is just an additional to the 3.6 that's already been spent on early planning. So this phase of the planning is really where the rubber hits the road. So this is how we develop the functional plan to build facilities that serve those communities for the next 30 years plus. Okay. So the next step after that functional planning, which will be funded through these dollars, is to create a business case that goes to SAS Builds for consideration. We know that these two facilities are number 1, 2, or number 1 priorities for the health sector. So they still have to go ultimately to government for a decision, but this is very significant and a very positive move forward.
Okay, very good. Thanks very much. That's Scott Livingstone with the Saskatchewan Health Authority. Back to you, Adam.
Thanks so much, Geoff. Here with Charlie Clark, the Mayor of Saskatoon, and Charlie, I know it's early stages to kind of digest this budget, but what are your impressions?
Well, there's a few important things from a city's point of view. First of all, keeping with the formula for municipal revenue sharing is very critical for us at a time when we're seeing growing pressures to keep building our city as the engine of the economy as we're growing. That stable, predictable funding is really important, and we advocated strongly to keep a strong revenue sharing formula, and we're glad to see that in there. The infrastructure dollars is the other piece that we're looking closely at, and it looks like there's going to be a $50 million allocation from the individual bilateral agreements that the province and Canada have signed, and so we're happy to see that, but anxious to get the intake process underway and figure out what are the things that we can start building and getting jobs created through putting that money to work, but also responding to the infrastructure pressures we're seeing in our community. I must say I'm glad to see funding for mental health. I think that that's something that we are really seeing the impacts in our community. We need to have a coordinated effort to make sure that those dollars are spent in a way that has the most outcome on those who are affected, and but that's an important step that we're seeing. And the one issue that I think is outstanding is the issue of PST on construction from a municipal standpoint. That does hit our costs of projects, and it's a pressure point. I know there's been requests to have that be reconsidered, and on an ongoing basis that affects our bottom line. And so I think that'll be an ongoing discussion.
There's money here for the hospitals, and Saskatoon obviously is going to be one of the benefits of that with the Children's Hospital, and of course there was also people asking for that temporary mental health assessment unit to be made permanent, and the government's made that announcement today that they're going to make that permanent. What will that do to the city of Saskatoon?
Yeah, those kinds of facilities are critical. Having a place where people who are facing mental health issues, it's a stressful time. It's a time when you need to have a safe, comfortable environment to have the assessment and to make sure you can get the proper treatment that you need. And those are the types of interventions that are really, really badly needed in our communities right now. And so I welcome that. I think we've seen the benefits of having the mental health assessment unit in place now, and there's a lot of stress out there. There's a lot of people facing it, and we're seeing it through addictions. We're seeing it through mental health demands on our systems. All ages, all backgrounds, all demographics we see affected. And the more we can address those and have coordinated approaches that get at the sources and the causes, and reduce the impact on people becoming hospitalized or harming themselves or other impacts that have huge impacts on families, the better. And it's going to take everybody working together to do that. And so how that money gets spent is what we're going to be watching closely. And we want to be at the table helping to convene and support collaborative, integrated approaches as much as possible.
Just lastly, what do you think the government's done with the balance between spending on urban and versus rural, in the last couple of budgets here?
Yeah, I mean, Saskatoon is the largest city in the province, and we see ourselves as interdependent with the rural parts of our community. We are a service center for the whole province. People come in and out of our province, and we rely on the wealth that's being generated in rural areas to help drive our economy as well. We still look at the overall formulas for revenue sharing, and proportionally there is a higher population in the cities relative to what is the distribution is to our urban areas. We're also in a more collaborative conversation with SARM and with our rural partners to sort of together come forward to the provincial government and talk about how we best allocate and utilize partnerships to build and to meet some of the demands that are out there, and coordinate between rural and urban areas on things like servicing and infrastructure and those types of things. So I want to be cautious about getting into an us-them kind of approach to that, because I don't think that helps anybody. And I think going forward, what matters is, are we spending the money as wisely as possible to have strong, thriving communities and industries to keep building the province going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you.
That's Mayor Charlie Clark of Saskatoon joining me now, giving his thoughts on today's budget. I'm going to go now to Geoff Leo, who's with a guest. Geoff.
Yeah, thanks very much, Adam. And I'm here with Sean Davidson, president of the Saskatchewan School Boards Association. And the education budget does look to have, I guess, there is overall there is a slight increase, I think, to the education budget, but it is modest, something like 0.6%. And so I'm wondering what you're seeing here in the budget, and what thoughts you have about what the government's done.
Well, certainly. Well, on the operations side, we are seeing a modest is a very good way to describe it. We're seeing an increase that is likely going to fall short of all our cost drivers for this year. So we're seeing an increase to the teachers' collectively bargained agreement, which is going to cost the province about $10 million. We're going to see some increased expenses from enrollment growth. We're expecting about 1,000 new students in the fall, so that amounts to another 10 million or a little bit better than that. And the overall education budget only increased by 26 million. So that other 6 million there has to address all of our other inflationary pressures. We know that we're going to see utility costs increase. We know our transportation costs are going to increase. We know that heating our schools, electricity, all that stuff is headed up. So school divisions are going to be in a difficult position just to maintain stability, just to stay where they are today on the operations side. Yeah. Where we're a little more encouraged is on the capital side. We saw the government announce planning dollars for a couple of major new school projects, one in Regina, one in Moose Jaw. So we see this government continue to be investing in infrastructure for education. That's encouraging. We also saw our preventative maintenance budget increase again. So the government has stated many times they have a goal of getting preventative maintenance dollars up to 1% of the replacement value of all the schools in the province. We get a little bit closer to that every year with each successive budget. So that's encouraging that infrastructure side is, they're certainly sending us some signals there. Okay,
so just back to the first issue you raised there. So $6 million is to address all of the inflationary pressures. And just to remind me, your overall budget is like what? $6 million is what percent of your overall budget?
Well, the overall education operating budget is $1.9 billion. Yeah. So
$6 million is like, you barely even see that. You blink and it's gone.
Well, of that $1.9 billion, about half of that is our teachers, or a little better than half of it actually is the teachers. Yeah. And so the cost pressures there for their collective agreement is that $10 million that I mentioned. Okay. So we're looking at the other $900 million. Yeah. Is they're hoping to cover with a $6 million inflationary pressure amount, and it's not going to do it.
That's not going to happen. So now I know that you're going to make decisions here. I don't expect, but you can at least kind of project big picture. Like, what does this mean or what are the options? I mean, you don't have any options to get more money, I don't suppose, so it's going to involve cuts of some sort, I would expect. But what are the range of options you can do to address this?
Well, it's going to mean that every board around the province is going to have to address this as they see fit for their own local circumstance. And in some situations, because of the way the funding distribution model works, so the government announces an overall funding envelope for operations, which is right around that $1.9 billion area this year. And that is distributed to the 27 school divisions through a fairly complicated formula. And then each division will get their money, which is unconditional. The divisions can spend that based on their local priorities, and we think that's really important. So for every board, it's going to look a little bit different. Each board will have to look at their options, consider. We expect that some of our boards are actually going to see, if we've got boards that have declining enrollments, there likely will be some that will see funding reductions as a result of this. So they're going to have some difficult choices to make, be that changes to their staffing, changes to their bus routes, changes to their student support services. It's really going to be a variety of different things that boards will do to address the shortfall, but they will do that in their local context and in consultation with their stakeholders in their own individual communities. That's important, and they'll make the most of the situation that they've been handed. But the government has a obligation to adequately fund education, going back to what we talked about earlier about the time when taxation authority was centralized provincially, and we're concerned. We've certainly seen successive budgets now, where 3 years ago we faced a dramatic cut to the education sector. Boards had to make some really, really difficult choices as a result of that. And in the 2 years since then, all we've seen is the dollars from that cut come back, right? There was a $55 million cut. Last year we got 30 million, this year we get another 26. So we're kind of back to where we were 2 years ago, really, essentially.
Right.
And we've got thousands more students now than we had then.
So it's interesting, when you compare, and I don't know if you've had a chance to look, but if you compare, so the other two places where a lot of provincial money goes is health and social services, and both of those have significant increases. And I guess governments have to balance priorities and that sort of thing, but when you see these other big ministries getting significant increases and you're getting what you got, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I mean, the government keeps telling us that education is a priority, and so we want to see that reflected in a budget where education really is a priority. And if the Ministry of Education falls short of other ministries, it's hard to feel that there's really an investment going on there. We know that investment in education is an investment in the future economy of this province, right? A well-educated population is very important to future economic contributions. So the government is going to have to weigh that in future budgets, and if they want boards and the education sector to be able to truly invest in students and truly invest in the supports that students need, then we need some dollars to do that. Now, I don't have any of the details from the other ministries or what some of these mental health supports that are going to flow through the Ministry of Health are going to look like. We're encouraged that, and we've said all along, that we think that schools are a great place to facilitate the delivery of mental health supports to youth without school divisions necessarily having to provide that delivery, right? The counselors, the mental health workers, addictions workers, things like that don't necessarily have to be employed and housed within school divisions. They can come in from the Department of Health as long as we have a commitment for that to happen regularly. And what's happened for a very long time, a couple of decades in Saskatchewan now, is that those types of supports have been employed directly by the school divisions. Right. And over the course of the last few challenging budgets, some of those supports have unfortunately been peeled back. Yeah. So if they can come in from other areas and be funded through the Ministry of Health or Ministry of Social Services, school divisions are good with that. We don't know what that's going to look like. Yeah, we do know that there is a need for an increased mental health support among our youth. We absolutely have identified that as critical. Yeah. Where it comes from, we're good with it either way.
Yeah, for sure. That may be a conversation to come in the future. Well, thanks very much. This is Sean Davidson with the Saskatchewan School Boards Association, and back to you, Adam.
Thank you.
Thanks, Geoff. You heard from Sean Davidson there. I'm with Mayor of Regina, Michael Fougere. And Mayor, what did you think of the budget? What are your first impressions?
Well, there's no surprises in the budget. We looked at obviously going to have a balanced budget, a minor surplus, which is, again, that was telegraphed for a number of weeks. Revenue sharing, which is important to municipalities. Again, we sort of knew that about a $10 million leap in funding, which is good. Pleased to see that. What we have found out, though, there's about $1.5 million that is pulled out of the pool to be directed to regional economic development and for governance. And that's a bit of a precedent because it means that what was unconditional now is conditional, used for something different, and so we just are concerned to some degree that not become a precedent that happens in the future. So, But to the extent we see an increase in revenue sharing, that's a positive for us. We're very pleased with that. We're 0.75% of 1% of PST, not the same as before, but it's based on a larger base, so that's positive. We note that the Urban Highway Connector program has no new money in that, and that again is an offloading of responsibility for infrastructure like bridges and highways onto municipalities, and there's no money for that transfer, so a bit of a concern about that as well.
In the past, you've had to go back, and I know the Mayor of Saskatoon's had to go back and say, we've got to redo our budget. We have to have some meetings here because of what the government's announced. How does what's announced today impact the City of Regina? As you said, you were expecting and anticipating a lot of these things.
Well, we certainly don't have to go back and do a budget again, which is good news, of course. We're beyond all that. We've got a much more, I think, regular and responsible relationship with the province and understand that. So we knew going in that we were going to see this increase of about 4% on revenue sharing, which is good for us, so we can plan our budget in the fall. No problem in that regard.
Gordon Barnett mentioned that excise tax money from cannabis not coming, and the government not handing that out, and their reasoning is basically it's not big enough. What do you think about that?
Well, I would say that before we saw any revenue coming, we should have had an agreement to distribute the revenue in the first place. That discussion hasn't taken place. So in that regard, we're not as far down the road as we should be. So yeah, there's a modest amount of revenue, but that should be distributed outside of revenue sharing to municipalities as it's being done right around the country. So we want that conversation, to engage that. I know Suma's had that conversation. I have had that with the minister, the premier, to say let's have this system in place, an agreement to distribute the money. Then we talk about where the revenue goes.
Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you.
It's Mayor Michael Fougere of Regina. His thoughts on the budget, as he said, and as I said off the top, not a huge surprise. The government was foreshadowing that this was going to be a balanced budget, a modest surplus. I want to just tell our viewers on Facebook, YouTube, CBC, and Periscope that behind me there's going to be a press conference or a scrum from the Premier. We're hearing in about 30 to 40 minutes. We'll update you with a closer time when that comes, but we'll hear from Premier Scott Moe, and we'll also bring you some reactions from the cabinet ministers who are most affected by this budget, get their reactions to what things were added, what things were cut. And right now I'm going to go back to my colleague Geoff Leo, who's standing by with a guest. Geoff.
Yeah, thanks very much, Adam. And we are here now with Darla Lindberg from Saskatoon, from the Saskatoon Chamber of Commerce, joining us now to talk about this budget. And so you were saying kind of some good things, some not so good things, but why don't we start with what are you liking that you've heard here today?
Well, we really like the fact that we have a provincial government that wants to balance the budget, not just wants to, promises to, and then actually does it. Yes. So closing a $1.2 billion gap over 3 years is not easy to do, and the fact that they have done that is a huge accomplishment, so we give them credit for that.
Yeah, okay. And that matters to you, why? Why is that so important as an issue for you?
Well, we're almost completely the opposite when you compare us to the federal government, our provincial government versus federal government. Federally, there's no balance to balance the budget at all. No talk about it. We have no idea. Balancing the budget provincially allows us more flexibility and gives us more tools, whether it's taxation or other means, to create a better climate for our province and take out debt later on if we need it to invest in key infrastructure projects.
Okay. Not all is goodness and light, though. There are some things that have caught your attention that are a bit of a concern. So what is that?
Well, there would be two things that I would probably flag. One is our population growth. So we have seen population growth over many years now. However, if you look at that in two different streams, both immigration as well as migration out of the province or into the province, when we're talking about interprovincial migration, which is people moving back and forth across our border, we're seeing a negative number of people move out of the province. When we're looking at immigration, we're seeing a positive number of people moving into the province. So we need to really focus on how do we keep the people that we've trained in this province and who are able to contribute to our economy, rather than letting them go out to other provinces and use their skills elsewhere.
And you're not seeing measures aimed at that, or at least not the sort of measures you would like to see, is that right?
I think the provincial government definitely has an interest in keeping people here, but we really need to have a deeper conversation about that and figure out how do we go about that more in a better way that will create positive results for the economy.
Okay. Did you say there was something else? Well, not like I'm looking for bad things or anything, but was there something else that you were noticing about the budget. Yeah.
Well, yes, I would say from a Saskatoon perspective, the provincial government has committed to putting in place the Saskatoon Freeway, which we are very happy about. Now, I've been involved in meetings around that for a few years now, and the provincial government has indicated that we're going to be going into a functional planning study over 3 years, and that we'll probably see shovels in the ground within 10 to 15 years. I really feel as though that should be accelerated. Right. We need to have that infrastructure in place in Saskatoon sooner than 15 years. So
there you go. Well, we have a new bypass here, so
I know you do.
There you go. Thank you very much. That's Darla Lindberg with the Chamber of Commerce in Saskatoon. And Adam, back to you.
Thanks so much, Geoff. I'm here with Patrick Mays, head of the STF, and not a huge increase for K-12. What's your reaction to that?
Well, we're characterizing it as kind of a step in the right direction. It's not near enough support that's needed for correcting the 2016-17 budget that took $54 million out of education. But at the same point, it is a step in the right direction, and we're looking forward to making sure that the money that has been allocated for education is spent in our classrooms and that it gets to the areas of need.
Some of that money is going towards teacher contracts, other is going to be going in the classroom. What is that money really needed to do to help support students and teachers?
Well, we know that student enrollment over the last couple of years is up around 8,000, and those students require extra supports, many of them. Many of them speak English for the first time, and so they're learning English. Many of them have some mental health issues, and we need to address those. Lots of diagnosis of learning disabilities, and so the classroom itself is incredibly complex and requires extensive support. And so we will be making sure that the money that, or advocating to make sure that the money gets into the students where the highest needs are. That said, it's simply not enough. And the minister himself this morning acknowledged that a lot more work needs to be done in education. And so we'll be continuing to push for appropriate resources.
So did you meet with the minister this morning then?
We did, yes, and yeah, he acknowledged that a lot more work needs to be done in education. He's gone around and talked with many of our members, and he understands the issues, and I think that's in part the reason why he felt compelled to act and make sure that something is done to help start alleviating some of the pressures that are on in our classrooms right now.
What does that mean to you that he's made an effort to visit? He's welcomed the letters of either criticism or praise. What does that mean to the STF?
Yeah, I think it's great. It's a start. Listening only takes us so far, and so this action today is a step in the right direction. I think we've already described for several years the pressures that are going on in our classrooms, and so I think it's critical that we make sure that we're acting and not just listening to the stories. And I think, like I say, this budget is a step in the right direction, and we'll continue to make sure that we're fighting hard to make sure that our students in Saskatchewan get the education they deserve.
Thanks, Patrick.
No problem. Thank you.
That's Patrick Mays, the head of the STF. You hear him, a step in the right direction, the money that's going towards education. Not a huge jump for K-12 here in Saskatchewan, but a modest one, and positive message there from the STF. I'm going to go now to my colleague Geoff Leo, who is standing by with a guest. Geoff.
Yeah, thanks very much, Adam. And I'm here with Marilyn Brompolen with the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. And so what is it about this budget that's grabbing your attention? Or any concerns? Things that make you happy?
Right. Well, I mean, I guess first of all, business owners are facing a lot of challenges, a lot of cost pressures. When you look at the CPP hikes and the federal tax changes and municipal property tax hikes and the costly federal carbon tax coming, they basically were saying in this budget to say, get back to balance with sustainable spending, but please avoid tax hikes. And so certainly they'll be pleased that we are back to balance. One of 4 provinces, frankly, in the country that are balanced. Quite a contrast to what we saw yesterday, the federal budget with no plan to get back to balance. So now we are in razor-thin surplus territory with $34 million this year, and again, surpluses for the foreseeable future. We certainly want them to continue to spend sustainably. It shouldn't be a green light, though, for them to ratchet up spending spending in any way, shape, or form. To spend on feel-good initiatives. We certainly don't want it to be a green light for them to, as they go into collective agreements, to sign on to costly collective agreements that we have to look at what we can afford. So that's something we'll watch very closely. But again, let's not forget how we got here. To a balance. 2 years ago we had a massive tax hike, which had an impact on not only our competitiveness but also small business confidence. So now, as we have the province's finances improve, business owners are going to want to see some tax relief of how it'll make them more competitive. Now, we don't expect massive tax relief in any given budget, but we have to start looking at what will make us competitive going forward, what will give business owners confidence to go out and hire, to grow and expand. And so that's something that we're going to be looking at going forward.
So, and what about, we have seen a significant increase in the debt once again, and the government sells this as, well, look, we're investing in infrastructure, so this is areas that have been neglected, and this is something we need to do in order to foster growth. So they have a reason for it, but at the same time, we're going into debt. That's something I think you've been concerned about over the years, and so I guess what about that issue?
Right. Well, I think when you look at it, business owners have been telling us that we do need to invest in infrastructure, we do need to get our product to market, so they do support infrastructure spending. Again, we have to look at the fact that our debt to GDP is third lowest in the country, but we have to be mindful of that. And so when we look at we asked our members what should be the government's priorities going forward when we get back to balance. And number one is to ensure we're spending sustainably. Number two, reduce debt. So they'll be looking at where's the plan to reduce GRF, because that's maintained this year, that's not increasing. Third, tax relief. So they're looking at it very responsibly to say these are some of the things that we need to look at. What we don't need is to ratchet up spending or sign on to collective agreements that we cannot afford. So we have 34 outstanding coming up. So there's going to be that to look at as well. But at the end of the day, business owners are now saying, what else can we do to be competitive? I know we can't roll back all of the changes that were made 2 years ago, but we have to look at what would help us to be competitive going forward. And so we'll ask our members those top tax cut priorities. One of them, I think that we could see, very, very soon, hopefully in the next budget, is just the basics of indexing our personal income tax rates. Now they're falling behind. We're not keeping up with inflation. That's something they froze because they couldn't afford tax relief. But I asked, what would it cost to index our income tax rates, and it's $10 million. So as we have the fiscal capacity going forward, let's look at some of those things. Again, that'll give everyone a little bit of a bump, and we won't be losing that ground on our income tax rates.
Okay, thanks very much. This is Marilyn Braun-Poland with the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, and we're going to go back to Adam now, who has a guest.
Because he's giving me
Thanks so much, Geoff. I'm here with Doug Lapchuk, who's the president of the Saskatchewan Volunteer Firefighters Association. I mentioned off the top that there's a $3,000 non-refundable tax credit for volunteer firefighters and emergency responders in the budget. It's a brand new thing. It was a promise from the Saskatchewan Party in the last election. They said they got around to it now. Doug, what's your reaction? What will this mean?
Well, for our association and for our volunteers, first off, it's an acknowledgement of what we do. It's like an attaboy. As you know, volunteer fire service, we don't do this because we get paid a lot. We do it because we care about our community. We want to drive towards our community's successes. And to be able to have a tax credit to offset some of our expenses is very nice. It's a step in the right direction. But again, I have not seen the document, so I'm not 100% sure as to the criteria. If it's a direct mirror of the feds, then I understand it, but I don't know that it is a direct mirror as yet, because I have not seen the documents.
So the government said, this wasn't in response to the Humboldt crash, but there was an extra acknowledgement because of what volunteers and emergency responders did in that case, that this was something they had to do. What's it been like for people that are in the volunteer service in the wake of that, having to deal with that?
Well, it's driven home to the general public the fact of the matter that what we do is very stressful at times. It's an unpleasant thing that we do sometimes, and hopefully it's raising awareness of the value that we bring as volunteers. We are not paid to do this, as I said, as a career. And I'm not taking anything away from the paid or career departments at any level. Those guys are phenomenal. But in rural Saskatchewan, specifically to the Humboldt incident, the support that first was there was the volunteers. And they did the best they could with what they had. They done a phenomenal job. Nobody can take anything away from that. So yeah, you know, it may or may not be directly driven by that. I'm sure there is probably some influence though.
Now there's something else there I want to get your thoughts on. There's a commitment to about $65 million over the next few years towards highway intersection safety. They're putting some money in towards that, rumble strips, better signage, things like that. Is that something that's necessary in your line of work and the things you come across?
You know, I try to stay away from criticizing highways. They have a terrible job to do. I know that you can engineer a highway to be 100% safe, but there isn't the funding, there isn't the money to do that. As we evolve, as we grow down the road, we learn, and it appears to me with that further commitment to roadways, highways is starting to learn. And I'm not in any way, shape, or form saying that they're behind the 8 ball. A lot of times, though, it's hard to take the human factor out. The roads can be perfect, they can be perfectly dry, sight lines can be clear, but the human factor. I believe maybe some more education to new drivers, harder rules to get just a driver's license might be a good idea as well. You know, so that's politically correct answer.
Doug, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
That's Doug Lapchuk. He's the president of the Saskatchewan Volunteer Firefighters Association. A $3,000 non-refundable tax credit going to volunteer firefighters and emergency responders. And before I throw it to Geoff, I want to say that we're awaiting the Premier, who will speak to reporters within the hour. We're expecting behind me. We'll bring that to you live on CBC Saskatchewan, Facebook, YouTube, Periscope. Geoff.
All right, thanks very much, Adam. And I'm here with Barbara Cape, who represents the SEIU. 13,000 members in Saskatchewan. You said primarily healthcare workers, is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah, okay. So you've had a chance to look at the budget. What stands out to you? What concerns you? What are your thoughts?
Well, there was a lot of hype leading up to this budget about a good news budget, a balanced budget, all those nice things. And I got to wonder, you know, how the heck is this a balanced budget? So I'm going to be doing some homework over the next couple days to dig into the numbers in the background. But the first thing that jumps out at me is the increased funding to healthcare, to the CBO sector, and to the education sector. Right now, I'm on the road meeting with members all across this province, trying to ratify a tentative agreement. And the money that was invested into the Saskatchewan Health Authority and the Ministry of Health is not going to frontline healthcare providers. It is not going to better hands-on care. So I'm not sure where that money is going, but it certainly isn't going to providing better health care on the front lines from my members.
That's interesting because, I mean, the Ministry of Health was one of the ministries that saw one of the most significant increases.
Yeah.
But I mean, a lot of that money is also, I mean, it's targeted, right? So it's targeted to mental health issues and that sort of thing, very targeted programs. And so you're saying that you don't think that's going to be getting to your members, or what are your what's your concern?
I know that that's not going to get to my members, and you're right. It is targeted funding with a lot of infrastructure work being done on the Children's Hospital, on rebuilding facilities. But my question to the Minister of Finance and to the Ministers of Health would be, how good is it to have one of those new buildings when you can't staff it? And I think we all need to think about that, because I know that there are people around this rotunda today who are saying maybe it's time for a little tax relief, or maybe it's time for some tax cuts. But the fact remains that taxes pay for our public services, and chief among them are the public services that we require in healthcare. When we think about healthcare, we think about hands-on healthcare provided. So our grandma and grandpa at the long-term care facility in Leader, Saskatchewan, damn well better have some hands-on healthcare in order for us to see that investment of our taxes. That's not the reality on the ground, and that's something that we need to talk with the Premier about, we need to talk with the Health Authority about.
Yeah. Now, we just spoke with Marilyn Braun-Poland with Canadian Federation of Independent Business, and she was talking about, there's a lot of outstanding contracts out there right now, and she's very concerned. We don't want pressure going up on the budget with these settlements that need to be happening. Perhaps she was speaking about your situation. So what do you think of that? I mean, we have a razor-thin $34 million deficit or a surplus. So what do you think about, you know, her push to say, don't be pushing wages up at a time like this?
Well, I'm fairly certain that Ms. Braun-Poland has received a wage increase in the last little while. Certainly the MLAs in this province received a 3.5% increase last year, and my members did not. And so we're in the middle of trying to ratify a tentative agreement, and you know, quite frankly, we're not in the same ballpark as the MLAs, and I'm pretty sure we're not getting the same increases as Marilyn Braun-Poland. But the fact remains that healthcare workers provide a vital service, an essential service, one might say, that we need to take into account because they haven't seen a raise for a hell of a long time.
Okay, thank you very much, Barbara. This is Barbara Cape with the SEIU. And back to you, Adam.
Thanks so much, Geoff. I'm here with Lori Jobe, who's the head of the Saskatchewan Federation of Labour. And Lori, what are some of your initial thoughts on what you didn't see, let's say, in today's budget?
Well, there was a couple of things I think I was really disappointed. There was no new money put towards occupational health and safety. We know we have a crisis in our province when it comes to worker death and serious injuries. So we really need to do something to address that. So I was disappointed there wasn't anything directed towards that. I also was disappointed when you look at the money they put towards post-secondary, for example. The little bit that went there, it's probably not even going to address the looming crisis that we're facing there at the bargaining tables. We know there's potential job action at both universities, so that was disappointing as well. And they did put money towards more access for students to go further into debt, which I guess in some areas that's probably a good thing, but we would like to see forgivable loans. I don't think that student debt is something we should not be talking about, and we need to take that more seriously.
What are some things in there that maybe you were pleased to see?
It was really good to see the money and the dedication to go to mental health in our province. I think that that's a really important issue, and as a frontline healthcare worker myself, I saw firsthand how badly that is needed. So that's an encouraging thing. I think that it's not something we should be celebrating. It's something that should have been happening all along, but it is good to see that it's happening now, for sure.
Lori, thanks for your time.
You bet. Thank you.
That's Lori Jobe, the head of the Saskatchewan Federation of Labour. Once again, just to recap, a small surplus from the government after a few years of deficits, $34.4 million if you're just joining us. And join our chat everywhere. We're on Facebook, on our website, YouTube, and Periscope. You can see here, where's the money going? Mostly to health, education, social services, a record spend in social services, in fact. And those three account for about 71% of all government spending. We have Geoff Leo here standing by, and Geoff is with a guest. I'm going to throw it to him. Geoff, what do you have?
All right, thanks very much, Adam. Here with Bob Beeman with the SGEU, Saskatchewan Government Employees Union. Got a chance to listen to the budget, read the budget. What are your thoughts about what you've heard?
Well, we're going to do a little bit more of that with the budget. Yeah, it's pretty early.
Yeah.
But it appears that they've lost a huge opportunity for extra revenue through the sale of marijuana in this province. And they're projecting, I think, $5 million in revenue. That wouldn't be enough to offset the costs of training and enforcement and dealing with the societal issues that comes out of legalizing marijuana. And I think they could have done a better job of that if they would have dealt with the wholesaling and the retail in a different manner. Right. We are happy that they didn't do a lot of cuts across government this year, but we do point out that they've already cut thousands of jobs in previous budgets, previous years with this government. Right. So our frontline workers are asking us for more support. They say they can't get the work done as it is. So I'm happy to see there wasn't big cuts there, maybe even the odd job here and there added to it. But we don't see where there's a commitment to public sector bargaining in this province. Our members have been going year after year without a contract, zero after zero. We got very small increases prior to this in the boom years, and we hope there's a commitment from the government there.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just curious about your thoughts about marijuana. I didn't realize this was an issue that you guys were tracking. What is your where do you come by the idea that we should have more money coming in than $5 million a year? I mean, so the government explains it's $5 million a year, but it's early days, so we don't have a lot of data to work with. That's the best number we can come up with, but what are you thinking about that?
Every other province, the government's got their fingers either in the wholesaling or the retailing or both. And so with that comes some of the revenue. In this province, they gave all the retailing and the wholesaling to private sector funders. A lot of it is going to outside international companies. And all those profits are leaving our province and the revenue that comes with that, which leaves the government with a bit of the tax money that the federal government has imposed on it, and that's it. And I think over the next few years, as we see what other provinces have done and the revenue they generate through this, you'll find that the revenue they generate will be enough to offset the societal cost of legalizing it, where in this province it isn't.
That is a very interesting point. That'll be worth tracking in the future. It's Bob Beeman with the SGEU, and Adam, we're going to go back over to you now.
I'm here with another guest, Dave Nelson. Dave, just tell people out there who you represent.
Yes, I'm with the Canadian Mental Health Association, Saskatchewan Division.
And I'm also with the Canadian Mental Health Association Sask Division.
This is Rebecca Ratko.
That's me, yes.
So, big commitment to mental health here in this budget. The government saying, what is your reaction to that?
Well, we're very pleased at what's been done this year. The Mental Health and Addictions Action Plan is now in its forthcoming 5th year. It really has not had any major investments until now. And so we're very pleased with what's been done. It brings us up substantially. There's still much to be done. And what we'd really like to see is that this is the start of investments each year. Not a one-time thing, and certainly not the tail end of it, right? There's still many, many things that need to be done. This has raised us, if we're just looking in a simplistic way, from being a couple of percentages behind the amount of money that mental health is part of health budgets across the country. So this brings us from about 5% to 6%. We need to, without the hospital being included, raise that up over 7%. And the Mental Health Commission of Canada is actually recommending 9%. So if we could see over the next 4 to 5 years that target and investments thoughtfully and in a targeted way being put in place, including community-based services, including counseling for people to help them put their lives back together, we'd be very, very happy.
Rebecca, anything to add?
Yes, that 9% recommended by the Canadian Mental Health Commission is actually based on the World Health Organization's suggestion of actually 11%. And it would be really nice to see that Saskatchewan would be a leader rather than trailing.
And we're at about 6% now, given what the budget commitment is. There's been something made permanent in Saskatoon. The mental health assessment unit was temporary, it was shut down. Now it's going to be made permanent. There's additional beds. Of course, we have money towards the hospital in North Battleford. What are those things? What differences do those things make?
Well, the new hospital, was so much needed. We've been advocating for it for decades, really. And we just attended the opening there a week and a half ago, and it's really nice. It's a modern hospital. It's going to be very good. The assessment unit in Saskatoon is very needed. I don't have a quarrel with any of the initiatives that they funded. It's just that there are many more things that need to be done, and we're very pleased. We're very pleased that finally, because it's been another long-term initiative is the complex needs beds and the step-up and step-down units that have been recommended for many years, and they're being funded this year. So this is very good.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
That's Dave Nelson and Rebecca Ratko with the Canadian Mental Health Association here based in Saskatchewan. We'll go now to Geoff Leo. Again, we're awaiting the premier, but first Geoff's with a guest. Geoff.
Yeah, thanks very much, Adam. Here with Paul Merriman, who is the Minister of Social Services. And so this is a ministry and a budget that seems to have a fair bit of activity, a lot of new spending. And so especially in relation to children and families, I believe $27 million. And so we talk about that money, but I'm just curious to know, like, what's the motivation? What's going on in Saskatchewan that's causing you to say we need to start spending more money here in the area of children and families?
Well, I think the motivation and inception of this is talking to parents and talking to people out in the community and seeing what they want. Some of the things that they wanted was to make sure that vulnerable children were taken care of, and that's certainly what we did in this budget, and we've been doing that working up to this budget. And the other side is people with different abilities in our community to make sure that they have taken care of. We had some dark days in Saskatchewan back under the previous government where we had a long waiting list. We've had, as this government, very successful moving people from Valley View, which we're going to get finished up this year. We have the last transition of Valley View. And we also, people with different abilities, that we make sure that we take care of the people that are taking care of them.
Yeah, you said to obviously do a better job of taking care of children and families. I'm wondering, like, what are some of the indicators, what are some of the markers where there's some problems, some challenges that you're trying to address? Like, what are we talking about specifically here that needs to be done or addressed?
Well, one of the things that we heard loud and clear is that people want to be able to go out and earn an income, and they want to be able to have some money outside of our programs. So we've done that with our ASED program, where we've allowed them to have not just $500 a month, it used to be $250 a month, that we've annualized that, because we heard of a lot of people that are actually working in the summertime because it's easier for them to get around, and we wanted to make sure that they had the ability to move that income around. So we're allocating $6,000 on an annual basis, so they can earn that whenever they want throughout their fiscal year, and then we'll do a catch-up at the end of the year. But we want to get them active in their community, and we don't want to hold them back from having some type of meaningful employment.
Right, and so in the budget, there's $50 million that is just kind of, at this point, a bit of a black hole. Now, because the minister has not yet announced precisely where this money is going to be going. But what we do know is it's going to address something around that area, right? Is there anything, would you like to break that news right here? Or if not, can you tell us a bit more about that $50 million and kind of what you're trying to do with that?
Well, it's been announced in the budget that we're looking at a new program coming in later on this summer. We want to make sure that this program is addressing the needs, such as things, what is it that our clients are seeing as barriers to employment or to getting off of social assistance? I haven't met anybody yet that wants to be on social assistance. Everybody wants to transition off, and this new program is going to look at aspects of that to being able to help them move from either being on assistance currently to off assistance, or that their time on assistance is just shorter.
Right, okay, and that will, it's not going to necessarily replace the existing programs, but it's the sort of thing that the government's going to be focusing on more going into the future, it sounds like.
Yeah, it's not going to be replacing. Anybody that's currently on our SAP program or our Transitional Employment Program is going to maintain on that program. This is a new program for new intakes, very similar how we ran the rental housing supplement last year when we did, stopped new intakes on that as well. This is going to be very similar to that. So when people come on the system, new people coming on the system after the start date, they will be on the new program, and people that are currently on the system will maintain on that system.
All right, thanks very much. It's Paul Merriman, Minister of Social Services. I understand that program's been 3 years in the making.
Yes.
So it's going to be quite a thing when they unveil it. Summertime?
Summer this year. Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much. Adam, back to you.
Thanks, Geoff. Thanks, Minister Merriman. I'm here with another minister, Minister of Health, Jim Ryder. Big emphasis on mental health and addictions in this budget, and probably one of the highlights. Why was it so important to focus on this for you?
I would say probably there's a lot of highlights in the health budget, but that would probably be the biggest one, Adam, you're right. Mental health and addictions has become such a focal point, not just in Saskatchewan, but right across the country, and in fact right across North America. We have a huge crystal meth problem in this province, and we just think we need to do better on the whole mental health front, and this is, I would say, a huge step forward.
What are a couple of things within that you want to highlight to people? Because I know there's a lot of things in there. There's money for staff, beds. You're making the temporary unit permanent. What are some of the highlights for you?
There's a number of them. You've stated that very well. There's approximately 140 beds coming up in this coming fiscal year, right across the spectrum. It's going to involve pre and post addiction treatment, detox beds, a number of them. I would also say, obviously, a big highlight is the extra spending that's needed, the extra funding for the Saskatchewan Hospital North Battleford, which we just did the official opening on. Single biggest investment in mental health in the province's history. And then there's a number of other things. There's going to be extra staff added. There's going to be 18 new walk-in mental health clinics that people can access around the province. We need to do better. We've recognized that in mental health and addictions, and again, we still got more work to do, but I think this is a huge step forward.
I just talked to Dave Nelson from the Mental Health Association. He said he couldn't take any offense to anything that was raised in it, but one thing he was asking for was to raise the percentage. I know you've talked about this with the media before, the percentage of the health budget, to get it up to, even a 9% level. It's about 6 to 7 right now, depending on how you slice it. How realistic is that to get to a 9% level?
I look at it like this. I plan on meeting with Dave next little while, having a good discussion about that. It depends how you look at it. We've talked about this too, Adam. If you look at mental health spending in all ministries, not just health, with this budget now, we're at about 7.5%. If you add in addictions spending, it's well over 8%, around 8.5%, I think. I guess I'm a little worried about it just being, well, we're going to set a percentage and that's it. I think it's a good guideline for us to strive towards, but I don't want to split hairs over it. I think what's more important to recognize, we still need to do more, and we're going to do more.
Thanks, Minister.
Thank you.
That's Minister Jim Ryder, the Minister of Health. You hear him there. A huge commitment to mental health and addictions here from the government. They're touting in this budget compared to what they've spent in the past. It's up on your screen now. 75 new residential support beds, 3 rapid access to addiction or RAM medicine clinics. They'll be in Prince Albert, Saskatoon, and Regina. 24/7 nursing supports at the LaRange Detox, in addition of 12 children and youth staff. Now we're going to hear from the Premier live. He'll be at a podium behind me just outside the assembly doors. We'll bring that to you live. That's going to be at about 3:40. You see the look there. If you could look to the far end of your screen there by those doors, there's the green and white signs. That's where the Premier will be standing. This is where the money's going. Health, education, social services, once again, 70%, more than 70% of the entire budget. And we're seeing an increase in all of those at different levels, of course. Health getting a larger increase than education percentage-wise, and social services a record spend. And you heard from the Minister of Social Services there, who talked about that. We're also seeing where the money's coming from, and we have a provincial sales tax, $2.3 billion, federal transfers, $2.5 billion, personal income tax, $2.6 billion. We saw back in 2017 the government switch from a reliance on non-renewable resources to taxation, with that increase in the PST by 1%, and an expansion of what it was. I guess we had children's clothes, I'm going through in my head, PST on construction, things like that. I'm with Jim Farney now, our political analyst from the University of Regina. And Jim, on that taxation thing, how big was that for the government to be able to balance its budget that we see here today?
The PST was a big part of it. I don't have the numbers right at my fingertips, but that increase 3 years ago is what set the story up now. Partly because of just the value of that extra percentage, but partly because it's given them a more stable tax base. People are stable, but natural resource revenues aren't, and they've driven the percentage of oil royalties and potash royalties down. So they're balanced now, and they're more stably balanced than they would otherwise be.
We heard the minister in the embargo news scrum say she wanted to thank the Saskatchewan people for making this possible, because really, if you look at it, the tax revenue from the PST in other ways, and the growth of the population has made it a little bit easier for the government to cut its deficit, because they had that increase in the tax. Without that increase, where are we today?
Without the increase, they'd realistically be looking at deeper cuts. And if you remember back to that budget 3 years ago, it took a finance minister down, partly because of the cuts, partly because of the PST. I think it would have been even worse, because absent the 150 million or whatever it is, they would have had to look at cuts to core services. And what you're listening to people do as they're scrumming today is they're all saying, we'd like more in mental health, we'd like more in education, but it's a good start. Without that increase to the PST, there is no good start. We're still trying to claw our way back to balance.
What's the balance for the government who campaigns against the carbon tax, which is a tax, but is able to balance its budget on the back, in part, with the PST.
The way that they're spinning it out is it's about federalism. It's about provinces making their own decisions. That's fair, but it's always hard for right-wing governments to increase taxes. It seems that they're going back on their word. Policy-wise, most economists would say they did the right thing, but they paid a cost with core supporters for that. As unpopular as the PST is, it sets them up now for a whole bunch of other stuff that folks are talking about, the mental health, the hospitals, the education. You do have to pay for those services, and the question's how. PST is unpopular, but stable and predictable, and a bunch of other good stuff on the revenue side.
What stands out to me, covering that 2017 budget, last year's budget, and this year's budget, is people here are still mentioning, I know you're listening, that 2017 budget. And a lot of it today has been colored by, well, it's not 2017, or 2017 was really bad. You think of the mayors, SUMA, even some of the union leaders referencing that 2017 budget still 2 years later.
Right, no, it's one of those watersheds, right? Mr. Wall retired not all that long after. It caused a shake-up inside the party, huge popular mobilization. And I think it's part of a memory in Saskatchewan of the Romano budgets of the early 90s, that people know how to mobilize and remember really bad, really hard provincial budgets. And so everything in comparison looks quieter, or I'd even say, looking for stories in the budget today, it's hard because we're still looking for that big shock.
And we'll probably be looking for a little while longer, but so far, if you hear some of the reactions from some of the stakeholders here, really a wide cross-section, they're saying, this is a good start, or this isn't as bad as 2017. And as I mentioned a few times, most places are getting an increase, depending on what ministry you're in or how you're affected by this. Could be big or little. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks.
Jim Farney, our political analyst from the University of Regina. We're going to go live fairly soon to Premier Moe. But right now, I'm with Minister Christine Tell. I'm going to bring her in a second, as we're going to expecting the Premier in the next minute or so. Okay, we're going to wait. We'll hold off on that. We're going to be on the Premier here in about any time now. We were told 3:40, so it could be very soon. Once again, we'll look at the budget overview, a $34.4 million surplus. And the government, after running a few years of deficits, and even announcing just a few short years ago that their deficit was larger than projected at $1.2 billion, has broke that down now, and where they're projecting a surplus into next year. Minister of Finance said today that she thought that this is something that was pretty delicate, let's say, that there are several factors that could affect that and could even make it turn into a deficit. I'm here with Minister Christine Tell. Hello.
Hi.
Exciting day.
Oh, it is. It's a great day. I mean, it's spring and,
yes,
a balanced budget.
And we have good weather.
Yes, it's beautiful.
Because sometimes spring doesn't come in Saskatchewan when we expect it.
No, for sure.
In your ministry, what are some highlights that you want the folks at home to know about that your government's focused on in this budget?
Well, I think the gang strategy. So we're going to be rolling that out over time. It's what we've contributed this year in this budget, $1.5 million. And there's a number of initiatives built into that strategy, some of which are, like using data and analysis of that data, increase collaboration and cooperation between police and correctional facilities, because if we have a gang issue, we can have issues in a correctional facility as well as on the street. So we got to increase that dialogue that goes on and that information sharing. But it's also to look at science-based, evidence-based initiatives that we're undertaking. It isn't because I think of something. It's about the data telling us something, and we need to pay attention. The other thing is that the community supports and really reaching out with I don't know if you've heard of the ROCA model, but that is just reaching out to those at risk in a very intensive way, repeatedly reaching out. It is proven to have worked in other centers dealing with these issues of gang affiliation or gang violence, and so we're gonna implement this in Saskatchewan, and we'll measure it within a year to see how it works. But you know, probably the most important thing in all of this has to do with the Saskatchewan Hospital North Battleford. I've been involved in that initiative right almost from ground zero, and it was so heartening to see that open, because people with mental health issues are very at risk. They're very at-risk population, and they need a lot. And it's about time that we had a hospital and a correctional facility all there to provide those much-needed services for people so that they can live as good as they can live. And I think that's awesome.
Minister, thanks for your time.
Thanks. Bye.
Minister Christine Tell, the Minister of Corrections and Policing. Oh, we had a little Brock there. Everyone's okay. We're awaiting the Premier, who should be joining us very shortly. He'll be taking questions from a variety of reporters from behind me. We're awaiting the podium there. That's a look at the Premier's Communications Director, Jim Billington. He's probably coordinating the media right now, wrangling the media. I'm going to bring Geoff Leo in right now. Geoff is co-hosting the show with me today. Thanks for joining us. And Geoff, what are a couple things that stand out to you from what you've heard here?
I mean, you know, from years gone by, not nearly as much anger, I would say. You know,
it seems like that 2017 budget has colored every budget since, because last year I got the same impression that people are like, ooh, it wasn't like last year.
Right.
And we're hearing that again. And I mentioned to Jim, everyone's going, well, 2017 was terrible, and now we're getting back up to that level, or we're committing to this or that. And it seems like that Band-Aid is freshly ripped off, even though it's been a couple of years.
And that is why, if you ever go into politics, apparently you rip the Band-Aid off early. And, you know, I mean, we even had Donna Harpower actually sort of semi-apologizing for having to increase the PST, thanking Saskatchewan people for bearing the burden of that tax increase, right? So, you know, better for them to have that as a relatively distant memory than a real current reality. The education thing is going to be really interesting to watch once we start seeing the Saskatchewan school boards sit down, look at the cold hard reality of what a virtual zero increase means for them, and start doing the math. You know, so those sorts of things are going to come in the coming days and weeks and months. And also, I mean, one other interesting thing about covering budgets for years, there's always a couple things you didn't notice. There's always a couple things you kind of glossed over and they emerge later, and you're like, well, wait a minute. So don't know if there's something here. That's the nature of this business.
And we've been trying to highlight a few of those. One thing I haven't mentioned yet is the creation of an organ donor registry. Right. It's not a lot of money in the budget. It's about $500,000, $600,000. It's not going to be presumed consent. We don't have the details on that yet, but that's something that organ donation advocates have been pushing for. They say there needs to be more coordination, that people are dying or suffering because they can't get organs in a timely manner, that Saskatchewan's behind other places that have this. We don't have the details on that yet. It was sort of just a line in the budget, but that's one thing that I haven't mentioned yet that it kind of stands out to me as something that's going to be interesting.
You probably already talked about this as well, but the $13 million a year over the next 5 years to go around and analyze and fix intersections like the Broncos intersection, where that accident happened, right? People have been making the point. There are lots of intersections like that around Saskatchewan, and apparently the government noticed that too, has cataloged them, and is now going to be putting in rumble strips and better signage, and trying to say, look at each trouble spot and say, is there a way we can fix this, shore this up to help avoid tragedy? Seems like, on the surface, seems like money well spent.
Thanks, Geoff. We're seeing the Premier now, so I'll let you go, and we're going to hear from the Premier Mo and the Finance Minister, Donna Harpower. So here we go.
Well, thank you very much, everyone, and I want to begin by thanking the people of Saskatchewan, because we all work together to get here today, to get to what is a Saskatchewan balanced budget, and one that is the right balance for our province. This budget makes record investments in education and makes record investments in healthcare. record investments in particular in mental health care treatment here in Saskatchewan, and record investments in traffic highway safety. It delivers increased support for our children in the classroom and for vulnerable families, as well as those persons living with disabilities. This budget is the right balance to keep our economy strong, as it contains no new taxes or tax increases. It makes important investments in infrastructure in both urban and rural Saskatchewan. And it's a balanced budget, where revenues exceed expenditures. It carefully balances responsible government spending with investments in vital government services in order to achieve a balanced budget that is affordable and sustainable, not just today, but into the future. This budget will keep Saskatchewan strong, and it will keep our economy strong. It's the right balance for Saskatchewan. So if there's any questions, be happy to take them.
So we've lost power on the Premier right now with his mic, and they're trying something new here today. So we'll I'll wait for them to fix that. There'll be a lot of people trying to get that up and running. Once we have the Premier back, we will bring his remarks quickly to you. There's going to be a couple of minutes here before we hear it back from the Premier. They're going to take a delay here just to get that technical stuff sorted out. We're waiting to hear from a few people. NDP leader Ryan Miley will be joining us, as well as the Minister of Education, Gord Wyant, once we hear from the Premier. Here's a look at some of the money, how it breaks down. The PST, as we mentioned, those changes a couple of years ago, that amounts to about $2.3 billion in this upcoming budget. Federal transfers, $2.5 billion, personal income tax, $2.6 billion. It's a big chunk of tax money that the government is collecting. Potash, $618 million, and now we're back with the Premier, so we'll throw back to Premier Scott Moe.
Yeah, you got her there now? All good? Yeah, well, that simply just isn't the case. $26 million I added this year, $30 million last year. This is a record investment in education here in the province. In no other year in the history of Saskatchewan have we seen an investment like we are seeing this year, not only directly into our classrooms through our investing in our operational budgets of our school boards, but in infrastructure, in infrastructure of building existing facilities in Rostern and Weyburn, as well as investment in further schools here in the city of Regina, planning dollars in Saskatoon, and replacement of 4 schools in the city of Moose Jaw. This is an investment in education that is a record investment, an investment at a level that this province has not seen before.
Why did your government move away from its plan to introduce presumed consent when it came to organ donation in favor of the registry this year?
Oh, we continue to work towards making it easier, possibly presumed consent, as we move along with the conversation of organ donation. What we see here today is a step towards that direction to ensure that people in this province are voluntarily signing up to our organ registry, our organ donor registry. I had the opportunity to meet with a couple this morning, quite a moving story, quite frankly, with respect to just that. So we are taking steps towards making it easier to have organs more accessible for those that need it, and easier for those to sign up to our organ registry here in the province that would like to donate.
But you're not, presumed consent isn't off the table?
Not at this point in time.
We're not concerned about the debt now. It's hitting $22 billion by fiscal year's end and $26 million by 2023. When would we, should we start about it? Those seem awfully big numbers.
Yeah, there's a number of ratios that are looked at, across the board when it comes to the debt of any jurisdiction, if you will. And debt to GDP ratio, is one that is watched quite closely, as we heard yesterday with the federal government. You hear it again today with us, that we're among the very lowest in the nation when it comes from our debt to GDP ratio. We are loaning in this budget for infrastructure, for schools and hospitals, but as well Crown infrastructure to replace our power infrastructure across the province, investing in our rural outbuild of our cellular access, as well as our internet access in rural and northern areas of the province. So the debt in this province as a whole is at a manageable level, when you compare it to provinces across the nation. But it is something that we need to continually pay attention to, which is why we set out three budget cycles ago, two budgets ago, under the leadership of then Premier Brad Wall, on this journey of a 3-year plan to balance, and we've seen that come to fruition today.
Is it eased off by capital spending slowing down pretty considerably in this budget, $100 million next, roughly $100 million next, I think, next year?
We have done substantial infrastructure investment in the years gone by. We were up a few weeks ago in the city of North Battleford, opening up what is the largest single investment in mental health care treatment here in the province. In that facility, the Saskatchewan Hospital North Battleford, will be opening up a children's hospital later this year. We've invested adjacent to that in the Academic Health Sciences building, as well as schools, 42 of them across the province. More coming in this budget, quite obviously. So we need to continue to invest, but we also need to continue to watch what we can afford and live within our means. And that, I think, is what we have seen a signal of this government over the course of the last 3 years. And I think we'll be paying attention to that into the future as well.
PST has been a big theme in the past few budgets here. Now that we're back to balance, what's your vision for the future of that tax?
Well, we'll continue to have conversations with respect to the PST, but if we look out the next few budget years, there aren't any large surpluses coming. We have been able to achieve what we have today as a province and as people and industries across the province, because we have been committed to the financial sustainability that we are actually getting to here today in this 3-year plan to balance. So we'll continue to work with our industries to ensure that we have a competitive environment here in the province of Saskatchewan for all of our industries, but we also have to continue with the very prudent decisions that Minister Harpower and her team have had to exercise over the course of the last number of months into the future, because there are no large surpluses on the horizon. So we need to continue to, beg for the consultation and the advice of all of our stakeholders and the people across this province in the days ahead to understand that we need to remain at a balanced budget.
Are you committed to staying at a 6% PST and on these specific goods, or are you open to upping that going forward?
Well, I would hope we don't get into a situation where we were a number of years ago under a different administration when it was actually at 9%. But the fact of the matter is we have made a significant shift away from being reliant from natural resource revenues here in the province to removing our reliance on that. The way to do that was through the consumption tax. These were some very challenging decisions in the years gone by. They were decisions that we've had many conversations with our stakeholders, our industry groups, and people in this room and across the province over the last number of years. We'll continue to have those conversations and make the decisions that are as to the best interest of the province as we move forward to ensure that we have a competitive economy, we have an economy that can continue to grow, but that we also have a sustainable provincial government's investment on behalf of the people here, because most importantly, the investments that we've enjoyed, and we talked about healthcare investments and infrastructure investments, as well as the services that are being provided, we need to ensure that they are sustainable for that next generation, for our children, and those to be able to enjoy the very same investments that we have over the last few years and hope to continue to in the short term.
We've heard a lot about some of the factors that could lead to large swings within revenue. Right? We could see crop putting up expense. We could see WTI prices shifting quite a bit. Do you have a contingency plan for those eventualities? Would that force us to go back to deficit down the road, or would you consider other types of?
Well, there's a number of what ifs in every budget with respect to natural resource prices and policies, quite frankly, that can be put in place and affect our industries in Saskatchewan by other levels of government. And we've been very vocal with respect to our stance here in Saskatchewan when it comes to a federal government's carbon taxation policy, Bill C-69, which would essentially damage the industries that we have here in the province of Saskatchewan. So there are vulnerabilities as we move forward with respect, or risks, if you will, with respect to the natural resource industries that we have here. Most notable among those might be the weather with respect to agriculture. So we have put forward, in my opinion, one of the most solid set of numbers in this budget here today, and I am very confident that as we move along, there will be movement along those numbers from quarter to quarter. I'm confident in the team that will be monitoring that, and Minister Harpower and our Treasury Board team, and we'll deal with those changes as they come. But we most certainly are excited here today to be delivering what is the right balance on behalf of the people of the province.
What do you say to people who can't afford to live in Saskatchewan now with the tax the way it is, and we're looking for some relief that didn't come?
Right, I would say we should look at the changes that this government has made with respect to removing 112,000 people entirely off the provincial tax rolls altogether, with respect to having the highest income threshold before you pay income tax here, provincial income tax here in the province of Saskatchewan. I would point to the investment in this very budget in vulnerable families and lower income families across the province. There is more that needs to be done with respect to the affordability of living, not just in Saskatchewan, but in our nation and in many cases North America. But we have come a long way in this province over the last decade with the strength of our economy, the opportunities for Saskatchewan people, and the supports that we have provided for vulnerable families in the way of tax reductions, but also in the way of income supports.
We heard a lot during the news conference today with the minister on how this provides flexibility for the future. As we go into 2020, and the certainty of having an election, what does this open up for you in terms of being able to make promises to the voters?
Well, this budget here is really the culmination of 3 years of effort of this finance minister, the previous finance minister, myself as premier, the previous premier, and is really the culmination of all of those efforts and that leadership that has been provided by the members of our caucus who have answered questions and engaged with people across the province. This has been a target of ours as we put forward our 3-year plan to balance. We've achieved that today as we are a government that does what we say we will do. And we look forward to having a strong and expanding and vibrant economy in the future that will provide jobs and provide all of the population increases and opportunities that we have enjoyed over the past decade. And it's our job to ensure that the supports are in place to educate that next generation. The supports are in place for our communities to ensure that health care and mental health care treatment and essentially what the people of this province expect their provincial government to be providing is being provided, and we're happy to do that here today.
Last question, Max. I believe this is great for you guys to have this budget again. What does this mean for your average people? Because they're still going to be paying more for EST and consumer price assessments.
Yeah, well, what this means for the average person is their taxes aren't increasing this year. What this means for people in communities like Weyburn is they are going to be getting a new hospital. What this means for people with children in the city of Saskatoon is that we are again looking at another school in St. Francis School in Saskatoon. We are looking at replacing schools here in the city of Regina, replacing 4 schools in the city of Moose Jaw. What this means for the people across this province is this government continues to invest with record investment in health care. We continue to invest in their opportunities to access medical health care professionals, also continue to invest in an ongoing conversation, and I would say very much more of a conversation in the years ahead in mental health care treatment and how we work together as a society to ensure that we can address the challenges of the next number of years. And we look forward not just to today being a culmination of that three-year effort, but being the start of a conversation on where we can go in the next decade. So thanks.
There you have it. There is the remarks from Premier Scott Moe live here on our budget coverage. I'm Adam Hunter here on the CBC Saskatchewan website, Facebook page, Periscope, and YouTube. Thanks for joining us this afternoon and staying with us for our 2019-20 budget coverage. We have a few more guests we want to get to before we leave you this afternoon. We're going to talk to the Minister of Education, Gord Wyant, the Leader of the Opposition, Ryan Miley, and the Minister of Highways, Laurie Carr. I'm here now with the Minister of Education, Gord Wyant. And Minister, we heard from Pat Mays a little bit earlier. He said this is a step in the right direction. What can you say to teachers and parents out there about the commitments to education in the budget?
Well, you know, this is the highest operating budget for public education in the history of Saskatchewan, so I'm pretty proud of that. But certainly there is more conversations that we need to have. I've traveled around the province meeting with teachers and trustees and parents, and we know what the challenges are in the classroom, and so this is certainly, I think, a step in the right direction, certainly confirms our commitment to public education given the increases that were in the budget last year. And I also want to say that on the capital side, it certainly shows our commitment, I think, to replacing facilities that need to be replaced because we're concerned about the health and safety of our kids right around the province. So that, combined with our increase in our preventative maintenance funding, I think demonstrates that to us. And the fact that we've added $500,000 in this budget to start talking about innovation, to start talking about how we can better deliver public education in Saskatchewan. So, you know, we want to sit down with our partners, with the STF and the SSBA, with teachers, to talk about what kind of innovative things we can do in to help alleviate some of the challenges that we've heard in the classrooms. I think, you know, money's important, but I think we have to think differently because classrooms are different today, and so the old ways of solving problems, you know, I think we have to revisit those. So I'm very much looking forward to those conversations and engaging those partners with us.
When you talk about innovation, what do you mean? What have you heard?
Well, we just know that things need to be done differently, and so we've had some conversations, my deputy has, with some international experts. We know there's experts in Canada and some experts right here in Saskatchewan. We want to sit down and have those conversations to talk about what that looks like. I have no preconceived notions of how we should be dealing with some of the significant challenges we have in our classrooms. But that's why I wanted to put some funds aside in this budget to start having those discussions, because I don't have the solutions, but I know the experts do, and I know that they'll be able to bring their international expertise, their national expertise, and their local expertise to bear on these challenges. And so I'm pretty excited about this.
What are the things that stand out to you? I know teachers have been reaching out to you through the STF, and you've welcomed those correspondents. What are some of the things that really stand out to you from those messages?
Well, you know, we've heard about challenges in the classroom, certainly, and it's true, and we hear this from many people, including members of the opposition, that composition of classrooms has changed. There's more diverse needs, there's more diverse challenges in classrooms. We've heard a lot about administrative burden in classrooms, and so how do we move forward to try to solve those things? And I think that having conversations around innovation is pretty important, and I think that that's where that conversation needs to go. But I think it's reflective of the fact that we've been having those discussions with the very people that are affected by that, and it's teachers in the classroom. And we're going to continue to have those conversations to make sure that we can, you know, bring the right solutions to bear on some of those significant issues.
I know there's been some hurt feelings and maybe some tense times between teachers and the government over the last couple of years, given a couple of budgets ago, and just conversations that we've had with the head of the STF and yourself. Where's that relationship now?
Well, I hope it's better. I mean, one of the things that I challenged our partners to when I became the minister was that we needed to rebuild our relationship with our sector partners, with teachers and with trustees. And I think we've been doing a good job of that. Certainly more work to do, but you know, having honest and respectful conversations, which we've been having, and I've been very, very fortunate to have those conversations with teachers and with the STF and with the SSBA and other partners. And so, you know, I think it all starts with having respectful conversations, and we're going to continue to have those, and keeping an open ear and an open mind. And I think that as long as we all do that, and I think as long as we all concentrate on what our primary goal is, and that's bettering outcomes for students, then we'll be successful.
Thank you, Minister.
Great. Thanks very much for your time.
As Minister of Education, Gord Wyant, talking about the budget and some of the challenges facing today's classrooms in the province. He mentioned composition size, all sorts of things. More students, of course, about 8,000 more students over the last number of years here into Saskatchewan schools, which is a huge influx and pressure on people in the classroom. Well, I'm going to go to Geoff Leo, who is standing by with a guest. Geoff.
Yeah, hey there, Adam. Standing here with Laurie Carr, who's the Minister of Highways. and has one of the, there are lots of interesting things in this budget, but I would say one of the things that really grabbed our attention from this budget was this plan. I'll let you describe it, but it's basically a plan to address problem intersections. So just give me an idea, first of all, what's the program, what are you doing?
For sure. So what we're introducing is a 5-year plan. It's intersection safety program, and we're going to be investing $65 million in intersections right across the province. And we'll be addressing several different things, right from whether it's signage or lighting or clearing the intersections, sight triangles, rumble strips if necessary. Some places may need passing lanes, or no, actually with this program it's not the passing lanes, it's the turning lanes. Okay. So just to improve the intersections that way. So we are already, before this, we were investing $7 million a year in something called Safety Improvement Program. So we're really just enhancing that program and accelerating it. So this year, it's $13 million being put into the new program and $7 million from our Safety Improvement Program. So there'll be $20 million put in this year, truly addressing intersection and safety.
Right, and I mean, maybe it's a, so you said we've already been working on this. However, my expectation is, I mean, as everybody knows, the Humboldt Broncos crash, which we just had the anniversary, and you know, that's obviously a very prominent thing in our minds. And what role did that play? Obviously, an intersection with some visibility issues. What role did that play in you saying, let's look more broadly?
Yeah, there's no question that that tragedy that happened just about a year ago is something that made us take a second look at what we were already doing, and we just said to ourselves, this safety is so important for the people of the province, we're going to accelerate this program and we're going to invest in it.
Yeah, okay, and so you've identified how many intersections. I've seen a map with dots all over it. So how many intersections have we identified?
So this year we'll actually be addressing approximately 60 intersections, but we have done a review of over 1,300 intersections already just to see where we're at, and this year we will be addressing 60.
One final thing, just on that point, has your ministry, any officials received calls from people, like just as a result of the accident, saying, you know, we have an intersection near us that also is concerning to us? Is this something that's kind of been in the public mind that you've been able to detect at all?
Well, you know, I don't know if that's actually increased. That's just something that happens in our day-to-day operations. When people have something that concerns them, they bring it to our attention and we go out and address it.
Okay. All right, thanks very much
You're
for that.
welcome.
That's Lori Carr, Minister of Highways, and Adam, it is back to you.
Thanks, Geoff. Welcoming NDP leader Ryan Miley, and we're hearing a lot of 2017 talk in reaction to that budget. Still today, 2 years later, what's your reaction to this year's budget?
Yeah, it's really interesting that you say that the 2017 budget, which was so damaging, big cuts in so many areas, is still being thought of today. But I can see why. We saw education this year got a bit of an increase. When you compare it to what happened in 2017, we're still not even up to the levels of education funding before that time, and certainly nowhere near being able to keep up with inflation, and with the inflation in the number of students. There's 7,000 more kids in our classroom since that time, and yet we're still getting less money. So I can see why those deep cuts are still having a lot of impact. Same thing with universities. You know, we saw a little cut to universities today and cuts to the scholarships, but that's on top of zero last year and a big cut the year before. So they're just in a terrible situation. And I just keep saying, if you want a good economy in the future, then the last thing you want to do is cut K-12 and university education, and that's exactly what they've done.
On the mental health side of things, that's one thing the government's touting today. You're obviously a doctor of background in this. What's your reaction to some of the things that the government's announced?
Yeah, we've been talking a lot about mental health, and it's certainly something coming out of my practice that we saw over and over again, whether it was addictions treatment or somebody in a psychiatric crisis or somebody who wants some help to take care of things when they're just starting to have some trouble and get some access to counseling. The ability to access for people without a lot of resources is so limited. So it's absolutely necessary that we invest in mental health. That's why we've been pushing it so hard, naming Danielle Chartier as our mental health critic, bringing it up every chance we can in the House. So we're glad to see that they've moved a little way on that. an increase of $9 million from the province. That's some investment. I don't think we've got to where we need to from an investment point of view, and certainly not from a systems-wide approach to really deal in a fundamental way with preventing early treatment and crisis treatment for mental health.
What were some missed opportunities?
Well, I guess the first missed opportunity is to actually balance the budget. We saw an increase of $1.8 billion in debt. So it's hard to take the government seriously when they're out here banging the drum saying balance, 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 when the debt continues to grow. And we're about to see an increase in debt by 2022 up to 26 million. I keep saying the wrong number. $26 billion. It's been a busy day. That's a problem. The other big problem is they doubled the PST. And we saw how that has devastated the construction industry by the inclusion of PST on construction labor. That wasn't touched today. So you've got all those job losses, all those slowdowns in housing and other builds. That's not going to improve based on the budget choices today.
The minister said today that she thanked the people of Saskatchewan for their resiliency. It was in reference to the PST being raised and being expanded to more things, which you touched on. What does that say to you? That part of the reason that the government was able to balance the budget, it seems, was that PST revenue.
Yeah. So when they introduced that PST, that moved taxes because they at the same time cut income taxes for the wealthiest. So that actually moved taxes so that the bottom 10% of earners saw the percentage of their income they were paying in taxes go up by 2%. If you're in the middle, it went up by 1%. At the very top, it didn't go up at all. So they shifted taxes to those who could least afford to pay it. The more you make, the less you pay. That's the philosophy. And when she's talking about the resilience, what she's failing to recognize is that people are actually really struggling. Our unemployment rate remains high compared to previous years. We've got lots of people out of work, people who are having their houses foreclosed, or they can't pay their mortgage, or they can't pay their property taxes or power bills. This is people struggling. And so when they come in here and say, oh yeah, it's fine, we balance the budget in the legislature, well, that doesn't really count if people across the province can't balance their budgets at home.
Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Adam.
It's NDP leader Ryan Miley joining us. He'll be our final guest from the government side on our show today, but we are going to bring in our political analyst, Jim Farney here, who will join us and give some final thoughts on today's budget. Jim, you've been listening. I know we got the little IFB here, a little TV magic. You heard from Premier Scott Moe, you heard from Ryan Miley. What are some of your takeaways from what the leaders had to say?
Moe, I think you could see the stakeholders gather around that message. We had a hard time 3 years ago. We're not quite back to where we were, but we've all pulled together. And most of, I was thinking of the STF or the cities earlier, most people grabbed into that, the mental health advocates. Miley had a harder row to hoe. This budget that everybody's sort of okay with, he's criticizing on grounds that you'd expect the leader of the opposition to, but I didn't hear a lot of that coming through in scrums other than from a couple of the unions. So if you're the government, that's a good place to be in.
What does this signal to you for what we could expect maybe next year? The government's already forecasting what they're calling sort of modest growth and surpluses going up to, I think, about $80 million in 22-23, right. Which is way in the future for me. But what does this signal to you for perhaps next year?
I think what they'll do is they'll continue to do what they've done, which is to under-promise and then over-deliver. I'd expect to see a bit more money than they thought they would have come next spring, which conveniently is right in the lead up to that election season.
Very cynical of you, Jim.
But I don't think there'll be any one big thunderbolt. There'll be no put everything on education or everything on infrastructure. They'll continue to kind of spread it across the sectors that we spend the most on, social services, education, and health.
So a few of the things that the government's announced, mental health, the assessment unit we talked about here, the potash tax changes, those are things that were recently and brought up last fall by the NDP in question period, and things they brought up for advocates, things like that. What does it say to you that some of the points that the NDP is raising, the government seems to have delivered in part on in changing some of the things they're asking for?
On at least two of them, people have been talking about a potash review since Calvert brought in the current structure. So it's hard to say which way that flowed. And the same thing with mental health. If you think back to the Sask Party leadership race, that was an issue they talked about then. Are they probably happy to take an issue away from the opposition that they'd otherwise like to do stuff on? Of course. But I think these are conversations we've been having for a while. It's not simply stealing ideas.
The NDP raised the debt growing as being an issue. Does that translate to the public? Do people, can they grasp that?
I think we've transitioned away from that. You know, your generation, my generation remembers the 90s when debt was a huge issue. What we've done now, people as individuals borrow more debt than ever, so they're really comfortable with it. And when governments are in a fairly solid place, it's not as scary as it was 20 years ago. So what the government, I think, is doing is saying, we've parked borrowing in infrastructure. We're not borrowing for operating, which is where you really get into trouble fast. We're borrowing to spread the cost of these hospitals, schools, roads out over 30 years, let's say. Low interest rates, that's probably a defensible decision. And both the defense and the attack on it get into minutiae about how you account for 30-year bonds. Something I don't think folks are going to really dig their teeth into.
Finally, no mention in the budget about the carbon tax. That's something that we hear the government talk about, the Premier talk about a lot. Is that surprising to you, or is that something that maybe we'll see in next year's budget?
You know, as it came up in the briefing, and the answer is, from the perspective of people in Saskatchewan and from the government, it's supposed to be revenue neutral. It affects some of the crowns a little bit, but it's not, in terms of the province's books, a big deal if it works as the feds say it's supposed to. If we find that it is doing something funny on the tax side, that's different. But for right now, you wouldn't be able to include it.
Jim, thanks for your time and analysis today.
Thank you, Adam.
It's Jim Farney from the University of Regina Political Science and International Studies Department. He's the department head. I'll thank him for his time today. And I want to bring in some of our recap here so you can see what the numbers mean. 15.03 billion in revenue forecasted, with 14.99 billion in expenses, for a $34.4 million surplus. Where's the money going? As I've mentioned, health, education, social services, the big chunk. 71% of all government spending goes towards those three ministries. A chunk for agriculture, protection of persons and property, debt charges, and then another 2.2 billion, which is considered other. Where's the money coming from? We talked a lot about PST today, 2.3 billion from the PST. Personal income tax is 2.6 billion. Federal transfer is 2.5 billion. That is down. Potash, 618 million. And I want to also talk about that just quickly. The potash tax, there was a change there, which brought in about 117 million to the government. They said that, you know, it was time to change some things because potash is doing well, so they have made that change. And what's new? We talked to Doug Lapchuk from the Volunteer Firefighters Association, a $3,000 non-refundable tax credit for volunteer firefighters and emergency workers. It's about 7,700 people could qualify for that if they reach a number of hours. That would cost the government, if everyone were to cash in, about $2.5 million. $13 million for intersection safety. You heard Minister Carr talk to Geoff about that. Once again, I was mentioning they eliminated the resource credit for potash, and then $30 million for mental health services and addictions. That's something that we're seeing now. And on the mental health funding side, $402 million, 75 new residential support beds, 3 RAM clinics, and one in Regina, one in PA, and one in Saskatoon. That nursing support in La Ronge at the Detox Center, and an addition of children and youth staff. We went out of schools, $3.3 million to combine St. Pius and Argyle into a joint use school, replacing St. Francis up in Saskatoon, and 4 schools in Moose Jaw will be consolidated into a joint use facility. And for highways, we talked about that money to improve safety, also $60 million for twinning and passing lanes on 9 highways altogether, and $121 million for highways, bridges, and culverts. I want to thank you guys for joining us today on CBC Saskatchewan, our live coverage of the 2019-20 budget here from the Saskatchewan Legislature in the Rotunda. I will thank all the people that took their time to stop and talk to me and my colleague Geoff Leo. Thanks for joining us on Facebook, YouTube, Periscope, and on our website. We'll have a lot more budget coverage over the next few days, including this evening on our website, on social media, on our pages, also on radio, and tonight at 6 o'clock on CBC Saskatchewan Television with Christy Clamenhago, where you'll hear from Minister Donna Harpower. Again, comment, like, retweet all of our stuff. Let us know what you think about the budget. We'll be engaging with you. Once again, I'm Adam Hunter. Thanks for joining us from the Saskatchewan Legislature and CBC Saskatchewan's 2019-20 budget coverage.